Hey everyone, this is Joshua Kirk here with you once again, and now it's time for episode 70 of Album of the Day, and today's album that I'm going to talk about is, today's artist is a group from Tucson, Arizona that mixes an eclectic blend of indie rock, Americana, and Tex-Mex into a sound that has into a unique sound that only these guys would do. It's the band known as Calexico, a group that formed in 1996 with just musician friends Joey Burns and John Convertino, who had played with, other musicians and as like a rhythm section with other bands. And then eventually they started writing their own songs and formed in 1996 and released their debut album, Spoke, on Quarter Stick Records back in 1997. I'm here to review the band's second album that came out in May of 1998 on the same label. And pretty much the first album by them that really does show what the band really is in terms of style and depth. The album is called The Black Light, and this is my used copy that I picked up at C Depot not a while ago. I wanted to review this album because I'm the kind of guy who really likes bands that, have a unique and original sound that's very innovative and innovative. And so you gotta know I am quite, hooked with Calexico because the sound that they do is really just, has this uniqueness that other bands, don't have. So that's why I wanted to talk about the band and this album right here. So yeah, there's the back of it. And the disc is over there, and you can tell this is used because the thing that holds in the disc isn't in the best condition, but oh well. What are you gonna do? But yeah, it's got this little tiny insert, and hopefully in the next video it probably won't be as bright because it's super bright in here, but it's kind of got to be that way, I think. So yeah, there's the little insert there. It's got the liner notes. The lyrics aren't in there, unfortunately, but oh well. Give me a closer look at these. So yeah, that's the packaging for The Black Light by Calexico. So this album, definitely, there are a lot of differences between this album and the band's debut, Spoke. Spoke had kind of a lighter feel to it, and it was like some home recordings. But this album, on the other hand, goes for a much darker and edgier type of sound. Both musically and vocals and lyrics only appear a few times on this album, but when they do, they fit in with kind of the aesthetic of the music going on here. So I think The Black Light, is the perfect title for this record, because this album definitely seems like a darker shed of light from Spoke. So that's why I think that title is just so fitting with the album. It's got, an unusual blend of instruments, guitars, bass, drums, cello, accordion, vibraphone, mariachi, trumpets, marimba, mandolin, piano, organ, strings, a bunch of different things going on this album uh, in terms of the instruments. But they all blend so well together, and I like how the band, just uses whatever works for the song. Like, no song on here sounds too similar to the other. Um, they're just choosing whatever works for the song, instead of just going for a similar feel throughout the whole thing. So it kind of allows you to kind of listen carefully to the distinctive sounds of instruments and try to get, the meaning, and try to, get kind of, and try to get some sort of perspective out of it. Like, for example, on the opening track on here, Gypsy's Curse, which I think is a perfect way to open this album, because it's a really cool track, like, with a bunch of interesting instruments coming through, like, there's this guitar riff on it. It sounds like something from a Western movie. And then there's this accordion that comes by that adds kind of a Cajun influence. And then you have kind of the jungle feel of the marimba coming through in the background. And then you have kind of a jazzy vibraphone. And then at the end you have this really, intricate cello. And cello, as well as some saloon piano, can be heard at the end. So yeah, I think it's really a great way to open the record, because it really does make the listener curious about what the rest of the album is going to offer. Like, this is one of those albums where pretty much anything can happen. It's very unpredictable. Like, I like music where it kind of catches you off guard at one moment. Music can be very predictable, but, this is one album that shows that, the less predictable, the better. And then you follow that with the stripped down fake fur that contains, like, a few percussion instruments, a double bass, and a steel guitar, as well as this weird, like, monologue that's very quiet and has kind of a fuzz effect on it. So there's like some sort of weird fuzzy monologue on there, and you can't really tell what's being said in there. Following that is The Ride Part 2, which features lyrics about, like, the narrator is obviously going through this, like, ghost town that, like, has a bunch of, like, so it's kind of the daily regime for him to, come across, like, these little ghosts of abandoned, like, buildings, and, so it's basically a song talking about basically what you experience and what sort of perspective you get in your brain when you're in this town, when you're in, like, when society just kind of abandons everything around you. And the instrumentation on here sounds nice on here. Like, I love the slide guitar along with the mandolin, along with that really nice mandolin on there. And then you have Where Water Flows, which is a gorgeous instrumental that, it's really the cello, the very gently finger picked guitar, and the vibraphone, like, all those elements just work together and have, something about them that just, works. And then you have the title track, which has some very whisper, quiet vocals in there, and the instrumentation is a little more subdued on this track. But, it kind of fits in because, it's called The Black Light, and, it's supposed to be kind of vague. So everything's supposed to sound a little more vague on here. And then there's, like, sound effects of trains coming through as well. And then you got, sort of, and then you got a sideshow that once again uses the accordion as an ability for the listener to, create sort of a perspective what the instrument is trying to add to the song. And then you have this, and then you have all this, and then you have all kinds of weird hand percussion going on there, going on there, and then you get like and then you get the use of sort of a Mexican feel with the trumpets and the weird organ and the loungy piano on the next track on here, Chach. On here, Chach. And then you have Missing, which is once again a pretty quiet, track with lyrics that are pretty dark. Like, this is the point where the story of murders comes in, which, some of the lyrics on here talk about, like there are a lot of lyrics in here that cover darker things, which mean they're talking a little more about death on here, and Missing's a perfect example of that. And it really does do that in the best way possible. And then you have the live favorite, minus the Cobre, for better metal, which just, definitely one of the best pieces on here. I mean, like, just, really, like, mind-blowing, piece of Tex-Mex music going on here. Like, the trumpets sound great on here. The strings sound amazing. I mean, this track just, shows that, like, there are a few things on here. This is one track that shows that just a few things can just make it, can just make the listener just, like there's just something about that track that just makes me so happy when I hear it. And then you have, Over Your Shoulder, which is a little slower, but it really does make nice contrast to the last piece. So some beautiful Spanish guitar on here, and then there's this really like lonely pedal steel that I think fits in with it too. And then you have this weird lo-fi piece called Vinegaroon, which was recorded at home, and this track isn't really as strong as some of the other pieces on here, but it does do well of tying the album together, and it still does fit in with the aesthetic of the record, even though it's kind of a buzzy, lo-fi piece. It just sounds kind of like some weird demo on a 4-track. Like, this song could have been on Spoke for sure. And then there's Trigger, which talks about, this guy who, like, obviously he kills everyone. So once again, something that, makes this album kind of reminiscent of, like, this album could remind some of, like, Western movies or those Quentin Tarantino films or something like that. And excuse me. And then you have the unusual choice of John Convertino writing a song, in this case it being Sprawl, an instrumental which showcases the mandolin really nicely. And then you have Stray, which once again brings out kind of the Tex-Mex thing and makes it sound awesome on here. So like the song. So yeah, there's that song, and then you have Old Man Waltz, which that song, like out of all the tracks that feature accordion on here, this is the one where I think the accordion sounds best on here. Like, it's got kind of this shimmering, kind of, you know, uh, feel. It's just kind of chugging along with the drums really nicely on here. And then you have this mandolin that comes in that complements everything really well. So this album is kind of like a multi-course feast. It's kind of like a multi-course feast of sounds. Like, and it's kind of like, a bunch of memorable, like, dishes that are part of the meal. Like, nothing's trying to overpower anything. It's just working together and trying to create a balance. So that's why I would compare this album to like a high-end full course meal at a fine dining restaurant. And then you have the track Blood Flow, which is another one that really stood out to me. Like a lot of the vocals aren't really are. This is one album where it isn't really about the vocals as it is more about just the lyrics and the amazing depth of the instrumentation. But this is one song, however, where the vocal performance is actually pretty memorable. Like, the vocals have a certain kind of intensity to them, and they're like slightly disheveled, and and like just the tension, just the emotion that gets packed into the vocal performance just sounds killer on there. And then it closes with another live favorite, Frontera, which, yet again, another track where there's just so many instruments going on, but they just managed to work really well in here. There's this rolling thunder drum that's used on there. Like, this is one song that contains audible use of an instrument the band refers to as a thunder drum. A thunder drum, usually it's this weird little like cup with a little wiggly line, and you create a bunch of cinematic sounds with it. But the thunder drum that these guys use is more like a timpani, and I love how it kind of just rolls along on the song, playing along to the sort of the cinematic feel of its cinematic feel. So, like, that's one thing I would describe a song as, like, and this whole album is, like, cinematic. Like, they have, they have a bunch of different things going on. And, they have some gargantuan instruments on here, and they add in a lot of, perspective, and they take a lot of inspiration from things. That's how cinematic this album is. So, not a lot of the songs from this album have been performed live much, but yeah, they still play Minus the Cobra constantly at their shows. But, if you go to one of their shows, you're probably going to hear more from, Hot Rail, or Feast of Wire, or, Garden Ruin, or something like that. So yeah, I'm going to have to give this one a 9 out of 10. So, if you never heard of Calexico, I would recommend picking this up. Getting this up. So I think this would be the best introduction to the band. Even though this wasn't necessarily my introduction to the band. My introduction to them was, a couple of things I had heard about them. They're with Anti, so I have a copy of their album Algiers that came out in 2012. And then also the band, Burns and Convertino have worked as backing musicians with Amos Lee on his album Mission Bell. That's how I first heard the names Joey Burns and John Convertino. And, just right now I just kind of started getting into their music, and, really just wanted to talk about them because I felt like they have a unique sound that, I think would really stick out to, some very, open-minded listeners like me. So you definitely got to come through this record with an open mind. If you're expecting some, middle of the road, predictable, safe record, well then don't check out this record. But if you want something that's willing to take risks and it's a little more dangerous and you don't really know what to expect, well then this album is for you. Like, I like surprises. I like it when albums surprises me. I like it when music surprises me, so this album just hits home for me. So that's my review of The Black Light by Calexico. I'll see you for episode 71.